Welcome to my channel, and nice to see you all again on a Saturday night. I know we're not really seeing each other, but it feels like we're having a little communication. So I thought that tonight we'd have a break from all the other kind of more contentious, troubling, challenging issues and talk about the Paul McCartney conspiracy theory. So I don't know if all you guys are aware of it. I suppose most viewers of my channel will be. I was mentioning it to a friend of mine. She'd never heard of it. So the conspiracy goes like this. While they were in LA recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the album, there was a massive row, and on the 9th of November 1966, Paul stormed off in a car, had a huge car accident, was killed, and he was replaced by a kind of folksy bass player who was also left-handed, like Paul, so that was kind of easy, and had a similar kind of voice and a similar style, and who was incredibly talented. His name was William Shepherd, and in one of the songs on the album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, right at the end, they say, "And welcome, Billy Shears," introducing Billy Shears. Now, obviously, William, Billy, right, short for that, and in Liverpool, Shears is a nickname for someone whose name is Shepherd. So it was almost like on Sgt. Pepper, they were kind of introducing that there'd been this sort of swap over. But anyway, we'll look into some details, and then we're going to look at Paul McCartney's chart to see if astrologically there's any basis for this conspiracy theory. So I'd first like to take you to this. So anyway, there's the website there, and it says, Paul is dead, clues on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So they also say that Abbey Road, that's the album cover where they're crossing the pedestrian crossing in St. John's Wood where Abbey Road studios were. They say that was like the funeral procession. And the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts is The Burial. And the Beatles stopped touring after that, and they focused on experimenting with new sounds. And this was apparently Paul's idea, the new Paul maybe, that the Beatles immersed themselves in this kind of alternate identity for the 1967 release called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, because it's 1966 November that Paul could have possibly died. Okay, so here's the cover photo. I probably can't see it because I'm in the way. I don't know how I can bring that over a bit. Let's see if that works. No, it doesn't. But anyway, that's the cover there, and it said the psychedelic Beatles stand at the center while wax images of the younger Beatles look mournfully on the graveside because the Beatles were no longer the same band. You can see this is a grave, right? And they've got Beatles written like when you do these floral tributes and they write the people's name in flower and put in the hearse. So that's what that is there. That yellow thing there is meant to be the guitar. Here are the new Beatles, right? And they're kind of mournfully looking on, they say. So what they say was the Beatles were laying to rest their old identity and their earlier image. And people looking for clues on Paul's death, they really interpreted this as Paul's burial and the burial of the Beatles as was then known, right? So let's see what else they pick out of that picture, because they got an awful lot out of this picture. So they say, looking at the older psychedelic Beatles, you'll notice a couple of odd things. While the rest of the Beatles are standing at an angle, Paul's facing the camera, almost like he's being supported by the bandmates at his side. The rest of the Beatles are holding brass band instruments. Paul's cor anglaise is black, death, and wooden, represents a coffin. There's a hand over Paul's head as if he's being blessed by a priest before being interred. And in Strawberry Fields Forever, Joel Glazer points out that the band belongs to his band, that this band belongs to Stephen Crane, who wrote a short story called The Open Boat, based on his experience of surviving a shipwreck. He and 3 other men made it alive to a lifeboat, but 1 other drowned when the boat capsized. So here you've got that group of 4, one doesn't survive kind of theme going on. Yeah. And in this fictionalized version of the story through Billy, the only character referred by name, it's the strongest of the 4 men in the boat that drowns, right? And they notice that Stephen Crane from the story died in his 20s, and a number of other figures depicted on the covers died tragic deaths as well, including Jane Mansfield, who died in a car crash. So let's see. They've got a lot of pictures of various celebrities here, right? Here's the older Beatles looking on. Here's the new psychedelic Beatles representing their new image. I guess that's Jane Mansfield, who also died in a car wreck, so there's kind of a nod to that. Then here they cover this bass guitar. And it's orientated the way Paul, who was left-handed, would play it, and the strings of the instrument are made out of sticks, but there are only 3 sticks rather than 4. just as there were 3 Beatles without Paul. So with a little imagination, you can also see that the yellow hyacinths spell out Paul. Okay, that does require a lot of imagination as far as I'm concerned. Then they've got the picture of the drums, which there they done like close up, but here you can see they're at the middle of the picture, the drums, and they go on to say that the most imaginative interpretation of the image is that if you hold a mirror across the middle of the words Alone Hearts written across the center of the bass drum, you will see IONEX He, which means die, and when arranged, it's I11X He die. Okay, this is like a little bit, I don't know, it's grasping. So this image suggests the date was 9/11 or November 9, 1966, because I did say he was meant to die November 9. And as the diamond between the words he and die points directly at Paul as well. One problem with this interpretation is that the British write dates as day, month, year rather than the American style, which means this date is September the 11th rather than November the 11th. Then they go on to focus on the doll, which is kind of on the right-hand side of the band, and they said the cloth figure of Shirley Temple wears a sweater that reads, "Welcome the Rolling Stones." And they say the Rolling Stones helped cover up Paul's death, and the reference on the cover was a thank you from the Beatles. The message also suggests that without the Beatles, the Rolling Stones wouldn't have become the undisputed lead rock and roll band that they became. And it was apparently an Aston Martin type of car Paul was supposedly driving at the time of his accident, and there's an Aston Martin leaned up against the doll's leg, and the interior of the car is red, symbolizing a violent and bloody accident. Also, the cloth grandmother figure on whose lap Shirley Temple's doll is resting is wearing a blood-stained driving glove. Ooh, a blood-stained driving glove. There really was a lot in the cover of this, wasn't there? And there's also a Japanese stone figure at the head of the wax images of the younger Beatles, and it's got a line on its head representing the head wounds that Paul would have apparently sustained in this fatal accident. It also says there's a 4-armed Indian doll. It's Shiva, which is the symbol of destruction and creation, and 2 of the doll's arms are raised, one pointing at the wax image of the younger Paul and the other pointing to Paul himself. And it goes on. I mean, they really got an awful lot out of this. There's another picture here where it says in the photo, Paul is wearing a patch with the letters OPD, interpreted as officially pronounced dead. In his article in Life magazine, John Nearly reported that this phrase is the equivalent of dead on arrival in British police jargon. So they found a hell of a lot of symbolism there to say that Paul had died. Apparently, Paul McCartney, whoever he really is now, whether it's the original real Paul or Willie Shears, he said, it's all bloody stupid. I picked up that OPD badge in Canada. It's a police badge, and it means Ontario Police Department or something. So he was debunking that. But as you can see, you can read this article yourself, and they've got a lot more to cover over all the possible reasons of what could have happened to Paul. So let's just, before we carry on to another article, let's have a look at his chart. So guys, right here we've got Macca's chart. Okay, you can see his Virgo rising, Neptune rising. In Virgo, most of his planets, as you can see, are in Leo, in the 11th house. Lots of planets, including the Sun on the midheaven with Jupiter, Sun conjunct Jupiter on the midheaven, obviously incredibly famous, well-known. A lot of 9th house planets as well, all the kind of travel, the excitement, the kind of adventure, the Beatlemania, the hysteria. Mars conjunct Pluto in Leo, that can often indicate an accident, some sort of serious accident. And as you can see, Jupiter by, I think these are the solar arcs we're looking at, are we? Oh no, transits. Jupiter by transit was triggering this particular conjunction on the 9th of November, 66. What we also have here is Pluto conjunct Uranus, which is close to the ascendant. In fact, Pluto and Uranus are on, I'm just checking the degrees. Pluto's on about 20 degrees and Uranus is about 21 degrees. And this said his ascendant is 25 degrees. But I'm thinking if his ascendant was a little bit earlier, because he's born earlier, then it would mean that Pluto and Uranus were virtually on the ascendant, with Mars very close there in Virgo. And that could definitely be indicative with Pluto and the energies of Uranus of an accident. As you can see, Pluto rules the 3rd house of the motor vehicle. And obviously being conjunct Mars at birth could lead to, violence involving an accident in a car. And Uranus rules kind of, it's the fifth house, so maybe, yes, the fifth house. He was kind of on tour in America, working very hard creatively at the time of his death. If you see here, Saturn is also quite close to the descendant in opposition to so transiting Saturn opposite Pluto, Uranus. This is a very, very stressful kind of transit system, straddling his ascendant descendant, making it quite interesting. You can see the North Node is almost at the cusp of the ninth house, still in the eighth house, which doesn't tell us very much. But as I say, Jupiter triggering those two, and this huge combination moving towards the ascendant says to me that something along those lines is possible. Just bear in mind that at birth, Saturn and Uranus are conjunct in the ninth. So the fact that they are opposed here across, the ascendant is interesting because they are present natally as well. And not too much going on to trigger these planets here. Okay, let's have another look at, I want to just show you the solar arcs. Okay, guys, here we go. Let's have a look at the solar arcs. I'll just make that a little bit bigger. In terms of the solar arcs, we have Saturn, Uranus, and they basically conjunct the sun, not exact, but they're very, very close to being conjunct the sun by solar arc, which is interesting because, we've got a double whammy. We've got Saturn, Uranus, opposition across the ascendant, descendant in the transits. And then in the solar arcs, that conjunction has moved to conjunct the sun. If we just look exactly where it was, 25, 26 degrees Saturn, and the sun natally is at 26 degrees Gemini. So that's quite revealing, that particular. Now you can see there's loads of planets in Cancer and also ascendant and Neptune in another cardinal sign, Libra. They are not doing much to trigger anything, and your Mars-Pluto conjunction is also not doing much to trigger anything, so we're not getting too much from there. Chiron is moving towards conjunction with the North Node, and also the North Node here was not far from a conjunction with Neptune, but that seems to be more about fame. Now, the most interesting thing I think about the chart, which says to me that the Paul we know now may not be the real Paul. Well, we know the Paul we know now is definitely heterosexual because he's been married to, long marriage to Linda, had his first wife before Linda. He was married to Heather Mills McCartney, and now he's married to another woman. And yet this chart definitely looks like the chart of a gay man. And I don't mean it in any way judgmentally. I mean, because Neptune, so close to a mutable sign ascendant. Also, Neptune is square Jupiter, representing the kind of more hedonistic lifestyle and more happy-go-lucky, freedom-loving, that whole lifestyle we associate with particularly gay musicians. Plus, if you look here, we have Moon in Leo, and it's in square to Venus in Taurus. This shows to me an incredibly strong attachment to the mother. And often I see that aspect in gay men and women, either Mars opposite Venus or Mars square Venus, particularly when they are both in cardinal, in fixed signs, because there's an obsession with the mother, almost a jealousy of the mother, almost something sexual going on with the mother. And we know that an awful lot of men who turn out to be gay have this extremely strong bond with the mother, to the point that they obsessed about her sexually, or even wanted to be her, or maybe wanted to dress like her. So there does seem to be something going on there that could indicate that he was more likely to be gay or bisexual. And look, Mercury, the ruler of his ascendant, is retrograde in Gemini, representing a dual identity, like a bisexual person or someone who might be in the closet and has two different identities. So looking at all that, I'm thinking to myself, well, you never know. I mean, could well be that Paul, the real Paul, was gay, and the Paul that came afterwards wasn't, if his name was really Billy Shears or whatever. So we've got another article here to look at. This is a lot more conspiratorial, which we'll have a look there. Okay, and it says, Paul's death in 1966 goes much deeper than an MI5 replacement operation. I think here they go on to suggest that MI5 almost wanted the Beatles out of the way and they might have been behind the accident. Now, I must tell you guys, I'm not invested in the story. We're covering it as something interesting. I'm more of a Queen fan. I appreciate and I quite like the Beatles, but I'm definitely not like major into them. But I must tell you, when I was about, I don't know, maybe I was 12, and I got this beautiful leather box kit of all the tapes, cassette tapes. How old-fashioned are they? So I think it was 12 cassette tapes, and it was the entire Beatles collection, and it came in a beautiful, I should actually get it for you, it's just out there and show you, but it's a beautiful collection of all the Beatles on cassettes. And I remember listening to one of them, and at the end, I think it was Sgt. Pepper. I'm sure it was that one. And sort of there was a big space of about 10 minutes on the end that they couldn't fill up with tracks. And it was all these noises of sirens and traffic, all the sorts of noises you'd expect after there was a major traffic accident, where you'd have all this screeching and sirens going. And this went on and on and on. Like my mom and I were saying, is this a mistake? Why the hell is this on the album? So I'm just kind of wondering if that was also a nod to that some kind of accident had possibly taken place. You know, it's interesting. Why the hell was that on the album, right? Like I say, it wasn't just noise. It was traffic noise, screeching, sirens, you know, all that sort of chaotic noise. Okay, let's have a look at this article here and see what it has to say. So if I go down a little bit, you can see the picture and compare. It says, exhaustive research conducted over several years did produce an extraordinary amount of evidence pointing to the great likelihood that the original Paul McCartney did leave the Beatles in 1966. There's a massive body of forensic proof, anecdotal testimony, scientific photograph assessment, comparative voice analysis, circumstantial evidence, etc. on the internet, which supports Ringo Starr's alleged revelation. So they're alleging that Ringo Starr actually came out and said something. So it says, the following article appears to be correct in stating that all the primary facts, with the exception of the very last paragraph, as follows. It says here, the British MI5 also announced an investigation to determine if an imposter could have indeed posed for 48 years as a member of the Order of the British Empire, Sir James Paul McCartney, especially during official ceremonies involving Queen Elizabeth II. Well, I'm sure it can. So it says, well, surely it was MI5 who coordinated the entire cover-up. Weren't they best positioned to do that so a conspiracy of silence could kind of endure for so many years? And they also say here, why did the Beatles go along with the cover-up? And the answer is that if you lived in the 60s and knew kind of how obsessed young girls were with the band, and that maybe they were worried about mass hysteria. I would also say, if you watch the guy Mark Devlin, he's a music journalist here in the UK, and he's done a great expose about how many, was it the Canyon Road or something in LA, musicians that came out of, was it Canyon Road? No, something. Sorry, I'm forgetting that one. But he talks about how many musicians' parents have links to the military, MI5, like the police. Also, Elton John's father was in the military. Elvis was in the military himself. But he says there's so many military connections with all these bands, and it's almost like they are all creations. It's not like they don't have talent, but they try and foster in talent in youngsters whose parents are part of the establishment, particularly the military establishment. And apparently even EMI, as we all know, is a record label, it came out of the military because it was all about sonar research and sonar weapons, and that's where EMI came from. So there's a close cohesion between the music industry, the defense, the military, and also the PSYOP industry, and they know that they can influence culture through music, and that's why they have to incubate these bands that they can control and then influence culture. And maybe they've got so much capital invested in the Beatles, so much emotional music, all sorts of capital. They couldn't just let that project go to waste. So if Paul had died, it would have just devastated the band. So they needed to keep that going, to capitalize on everything they'd invested and to push whatever cultural agendas they were trying to push through the Beatles. So I think that's why they had to keep it going. Okay, here they kind of saying here that the shock would have been too much for the generations, right? And they talk here about how wild women would get, and they've got some pictures there, and so that's their kind of raison d'etre, but I don't agree with that one. So it says here, the real Paul McCartney died or left the world scene as of November 9, 66, and that's an absolute certainty for those initiated into this particular line of inquiry. And it just says there, why did MI5 arrange for his removal? Well, did they? Was it an accident? I think it probably was an accident. But here it says that his death was the result of an MI5 black operation overseen by the Tavistock Institute, and it was because the Beatles had too much power and influence, and they thought that they might take advantage of it in ways that may be contrary to what the state had planned. I don't know. So anyway, let's go on to see what it says next. It also mentions the drug overdose of their first manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967. It was meant to further devastate the Beatles, and his knowledge of Paul's death had led to a lot of personal problems in his own life because he couldn't handle it. And it said George Harrison also lost his bouts with throat cancer, lung cancer, and a brain tumor at the age of 58. And these are considered suspect by many people. And then there was John Lennon's shooting outside the Dakota building, the same building in New York where that really creepy film, Rosemary's Baby by Roman Polanski, was shot. I don't know if you know that. And they say that this Mark David Chapman who shot John Lennon was really a Manchurian candidate. Talks about how they were so influential in the rock and roll revolution. And it asks here, did Ringo Starr actually admit that Paul McCartney died in 66 and was replaced with a lookalike? And it's got here an article which says former Beatle Ringo Starr claims the real Paul McCartney died in 66 and was replaced by a lookalike. He said, when Paul died, we all panicked, claims Ringo, obviously very emotional. We didn't know what to do, and Brian Epstein, our manager, suggested that we hire Billy Shears as a temporary solution. It was supposed to only last a week or two, but time went by and no one seemed to notice, so we just kept playing along. Billy turned out to be a pretty good musician, and he was able to perform almost better than Paul. The only problem is he didn't get along with John. So here we've got the picture of William Shears, better known as Billy Shears, does indeed disappear from records in 1966, and no trace of him could be found after Paul's alleged death. Isn't this fascinating? Ringo said, we felt guilty about the deception. We wanted to tell the world the truth, but we were afraid of their reaction. We thought, God, the whole planet's going to hate us for the lies we've told, so we just kept lying. But we did send subtle clues to relieve our consciousness. When the first rumors finally began about the whole thing, we felt very nervous and we started fighting with each other a lot. At some point, it was too much for John and he decided to leave. So you can carry on reading that article there, and it tells you more about the rumors about Paul's death. But I've covered all the main points for you guys to make up your mind whether this is something you feel is worth, pursuing at any length. And I've given you my astrological take on it. So I do hope you'll enjoy that. I've been looking forward to doing this one for a long time. I'll put those articles there. You can read them in depth. As I said, I don't want to do a whole thing reading other people's articles. I've given you my take, and hopefully I've whetted your appetite for more. Have a brilliant Saturday night. I hope you're all keeping well.